There's a very influential perspective on studying consciousness. I mean, you can trace it back to Descartes in the 17th century, but most recently to the Australian philosopher David Chalmers, who put it very eloquently in terms of a distinction between what he called the hard problem of consciousness and the easy problems of consciousness. The easy problems are not easy at all, but they're the problems of how the brain and body do what they do. How do the complex circuits inside the brain explain the functional properties of behavior, of perception? The easy problems are just the problems of neuroscience when you sweep conscious experience under the carpet and forget about it entirely. You just want to understand how the mechanisms of the brain support all the behavioral and functional things that we know brains do. And that's what people have been doing ever since Galileo, ever since the birth of science, really. The hard problem for David Chalmers is why and how should any of this have anything to do with conscious experience at all? Why aren't complex brains that subserve all the functions that they do, why doesn't this just all go on in the dark, so to speak, without there being any conscious experience happening? That's the hard problem. And so the idea is that even if we solved the easy problems of neuroscience, that would give us no hint. We'd still be completely baffled and mystified when it comes to the hard problem. And this seems intuitively right. I mean, it's intuitively tempting to think this. That, okay, I know what a mechanism is like. I can think of, for instance, 3 or 4 wires connecting lights, and I can understand how these lights come on or off depending on how they're connected up. And that doesn't seem to have anything to do with conscious experience. That's a simple mechanism. So instead of 3 lights, what if I had 86 billion wired up in a complicated way? Why should that be any different? That's the intuition. The problem is that it's very hard, at least this is what I think it's very hard to make claims about what would still seem mysterious when we're making assumptions about something as complicated as the brain. You can't just extrapolate from our understanding of what a simple mechanism can do to what it would be, what kinds of things such a remarkable and complex object as the brain is capable of once we fully understand it. What I think we should do is, instead of pretending that consciousness doesn't exist and sweeping it under the carpet and just focusing on the easy problems of consciousness, and instead of focusing on the hard problem head on and trying to solve this incredibly metaphysically, it does seem mysterious, how could any mechanism give rise to consciousness? Let's do something in the middle. Let's accept that conscious experiences exist. I mean, we know they do. It's the most familiar and apparent thing to each of us. And let's try to explain the properties that conscious experiences have in terms of things happening in brains and bodies. And once we do this, we'll be able to explain properties of consciousness. We'll be able to maybe predict why a particular conscious experience happens at one time and not another, and maybe control as well, maybe able to control conscious experiences. And as we evolve our ability to do this, as science progresses, the basic mystery of why a mechanism is associated with consciousness, well, that might start to fade away. So I call this in consciousness, I call this the real problem of consciousness. Let's try to explain properties of consciousness and properties of brains and bodies. If we can draw mappings, build bridges of explanation between these two domains, we're making progress. And at the end of the day, there'll either still be a mystery or there won't be a mystery, but let's see.